It's not the AI that will replace you. It's the human being using AI that will replace you.
Price tag's still on there. Oh my God. And the name brand of the shirt.
Hello, on today's episode, I am excited to be joined by my friend Scott Choppin. Scott is the founder and CEO of Urban Pacific Group, a real estate firm focused on solving housing challenges through innovative development. With decades of experience in the business, Scott has built a reputation for creating opportunities where others see obstacles. From a family legacy in real estate to pioneering new housing models and exploring how AI can transform the industry, he is helping to shape the future of development and entrepreneurship. Welcome to Fish Factor, Scott. How long have we known each other, by the way? It's supposed to be over 10 years, I think.
Yeah, actually, you know what's funny? I was thinking about this morning. It was 2012 because that was the year that I joined Aji. And in fact, you and I had lunch, at the in the the former location. Yeah, it's how many ever years that is. 24.
Yeah, it's longer than I
14.
thought.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I guess. Wow, we've had a lot going on. So, for those of you that have ever watched Kings of Fish, our Amazon reality series, you'll see Scott where he was helping to tackle some of the challenges we had in our Long Beach location, which I signed the lease for that one in October 2017. We finally got it open with Scott's help in 2020, and then 6 weeks later got shut down for the pandemic. Yeah. It's open now. It's doing well, but what a journey, huh? Yeah. So let's start this way. What got you into this business? Tell me a little bit of your origin story.
Yeah. So I come from a family background in the real estate development business. So my uncle Mike Choppin, and my dad Kerry Choppin both were developers in their own right. And particularly my uncle Mike had a really great amount of success. So in Long Beach, where I live, and a native Long Beach dweller, my family did a bunch of high-rise office buildings, the World Trade Center, several thousand apartments around the United States, a lot of office buildings. They were big office developers.
The World Trade Center here in Long Beach on Ocean.
Correct. Yeah. That's right.
Yes. Every day.
Yeah, exactly. Right on the way. So that Mike gave me like a background of being in the real estate development business. It's not a business you would choose like randomly. Like you don't go to the library and, how to be a real estate developer, a book that you pick up. It usually is people that are around it in some way. I have family, but, you'll see accountants and lawyers and, construction people, architects, people that are that I describe as touching the deal usually will be sort of pulled into it in some way often. If they have a more entrepreneurial bent, being a developer is, pretty risky business generally. So, being around it. And then, after high school, I didn't really have any great game plan. And I ended up working in the electrical trades for a handful of years. And that sort of gave me, a great construction background. But what it taught me was I didn't want to be in construction, sort of like the not that, not working in the trades. It's a great business. No, criticism of it, but it wasn't for me. And notably, I worked on a lot of new construction apartment buildings in Long Beach in that sort of, rush of apartment development in the late 80s. And funny story, I was new when the developer would show up to the job site. Nice car, in those days, people wore suits and ties and, walking around the job site. It was clearly the boss. And I was like, I know who that, I know that avatar, that type. And finally delivered to me, I want to do that. So that's sort of how I decided to, be a real estate developer.
You should bring up a really good point that I've experienced with you and other projects too, is development, real estate in general, like all the different parts of it. It's not like what we do. Buy shrimp Monday, sell it Tuesday, put the money in the bank Wednesday. Like to do real estate development, the time horizons are long.
Yeah.
And there's so many different layers. Like I'll give you an example, like where it was relevant for us. There was a point where we were trying to get Long Beach open forever, and now it wasn't, I'm going to go more into the restaurant side of it than the development side of it. Mm-hmm. But my family was like, why can't we just open, in January, and it was December. And they just don't understand why you can't just turn the lights on and start coming people in. So we actually, and I realized some people like me and my family like get to be more visual about it. So we have a giant whiteboard in the other office, like the home office, and we just created I had a person who was dealing with that create a timeline so they could see. It was actually Josephine at the time. And I was like, well, you got fire department's got to have a permit. That's going to take this many days.
Hmm.
Health department has to do this. You have to have this other one. Then we have to get the utility. And when you do all these lines, you realize one can't happen without the other. They sort of have to be synced up. And when it's not till it's all done, then you can finally get your final approval, your certificate of occupancy. And then you got to train. You got to make sure the technology works, and it's like so similar to opening a restaurant and developing and building it, have so many of the same timelines that you can't skip over one or everything falls apart and you got to go back to the beginning sometimes.
Right. And it's interesting, because you and I, like for your audience, you and I work together. So part of our offer is to do development services to third parties for companies that need to do development projects, but isn't necessarily their day-to-day business. And it's really enlightening to me to, like I've been doing it for like as a career, like 35 plus years. In fact, I hardly even talk about what the time is anymore. And it's interesting to me, for me, it's like the day-to-day flow of those project kind of issues that you just described. But then, to talk to people that are outside the business, it appears, I don't want to say it appears simple. Like people you guys looked at it, nobody thought it was simple. But what ends up is you don't realize how crazy complicated it is. And then, overarching all that is you're dealing with the city, in this case, city of Long Beach or city of Los Angeles, depending on the jurisdiction. And that really throws a total like time monkey wrench into the works that like you can sort of try to control. And that's what, like professionals end up, learning how to do is like work. I don't want to call it tricks, but it's like, just a lot of little moves that you make, you and I would call them tactics of how to work around, oh, we're stuck in this department, we need to call this other guy and he calls the second guy and, maybe it's a political move, maybe it's some other kind of move. And that really becomes, almost like an art to it. And obviously, for me, it's day to day, we do this in our own projects and then help other people, but even small projects, the example I always see is, somebody trying to open like an ice cream parlor or a coffee house in a little retail space on 2nd Street in Long Beach. And I watch people get hung up on stuff. And, sometimes I call them and I'll say, hey, look, where are you stuck? Let me just, let's think together and see if we can break you loose. And you can't always, but, team knowledge, expertise, picking the right, people to work with often will help things break loose.
So sometimes I noticed in this last project we have trying to get our temporary location open next to where we've been for the last 40 years, is you have political officials that are like motivated for you to get open because they want to have the PR. That's great. We love to help each other out. Okay, we'll go in and we'll talk to this agency or that agency or this other agency for you. And then I'm looking at, I thought it was going to take this long, and now it seems to be taking this long. And then you find out that those guys don't necessarily like or get along with the political person that's trying to help you. Well, I don't know who gets along with who.
Yeah.
But you bump into sort of like, I don't know what the narrative is that happens in the background of like, our job's hard enough as it is. We don't need somebody coming in and telling us how to do it.
You mean from like the person getting the call from the politician?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the plan.
It wasn't like we were strategically trying to apply pressure. There was the offer that came, we can help. And in some ways, I'm sure that it did help in a lot of other ways, but you don't realize the different battling, whether it's personalities or narratives or whatever that is. It becomes so complex. So there's a timeline issue. And then in the background, it's making sure everybody actually gets along with one another.
Well, and that, like I describe it as an art, and so part of it is just, having been through, like, let's say you go through 10 or 20, different sort of scenarios like you guys, experienced in the landing where, you've got a great plan checker, but, he's stuck in his bureaucracy. And then, there's another part, like, think of it this way. All these city processes are all bureaucracies of their own, like the building guy and the fire department guy and the health person and this kind of thing. And then you sort of, your job as the owner and, sort of my job as a developer is sort of mash all those together. I mean, they are mashed together. I mean, so, and then you got to sort of weed your way through it. And this is the interesting thing to me about development. I found it, and I'm biased because I do this every day, but it's like one of the most challenging businesses because there's so many different aspects to it, right? Like one phone call, I'm talking to an architect to design a project. The next, I'm talking to a capital guy to raise money. The third call is I'm talking to a politician. Fourth call is, I'm talking to some staffer at the planning department. And everybody, everyone has their different, needs and wants and, what they're trying to do and overlay just a bureaucratic sort of mood and culture, amongst all those people that you might call. Never a boring day in the development business.
Yeah, no.
Sometimes exciting in ways that we don't want, but
What,
never boring.
how would you define, what is different about your approach versus other people that do what you do? What do you think sets you apart?
Yeah, I think, so I came up with this. So my dad is a developer. He's still around. My uncle passed away, several years ago. And so my dad and I get together for beer every once in a while. In fact, there's a local place in Long Beach called JoJo's, real famous,
Yeah.
sort of pool hall, beer hall kind of place. And so we go there every couple of weeks. So one day we're sitting down over beers and we talk about the development business. And, I got on this riff. I was like, oh man, really development's all problem solving. Like just 100%, hours on hours in the day and solving this, solving that. And then I go, in fact, it's funny, Mike, I sort of said, oh, it's like 75%. And then I go, oh, it's 90%. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, it's like 100%, just all day, every day solving problems. And then, but then I added, but then it needs to have, be paired up with a good strategy. And so what I came up with is this tagline that we use internally at the company. I mean, it's external in marketing, but we call it strategy plus execution. Oh. So what I say is you got to have a good or great strategy, and you have good or great execution. Maybe just call them both great, right? Great strategy, great execution. Because if you have bad strategy, you could have killer execution, it still fails. You could have a brilliant strategy and crappy execution, and it will still fail. Like you need both those together. And so one of the ways that we differentiate for our own operations, but then in the help that we give to other people, is we'll always start with strategy, right? And I know this is a language you and I have in common, but so often what I find when people get stuck is that they didn't define the strategy well enough. Now, for you guys, your project at Landing, the strategy was clear, right? It was like, hey, we're going to open up a restaurant at the waterfront in this phase 2 at West Harbor. Right. So that strategy was very clear. But then a different part of the strategy, I could help with, which is defining the building types and how that would go through the city process. And it's layered, right? Like top level strategy was open a restaurant, let's expand and make our business more successful. And then, working lower and lower levels of strategy down into, eventually, the lowest levels that you get. And so I will always start with strategy first, because unless you get that right, I could be a great executor. I could have great project managers, which we do, and they're really good at that technical day-to-day trench warfare. But if you don't have both of them together, there's just no way to succeed. And, this is fundamental probably to lots of different businesses, but particularly in development, if you pick the wrong strategy, you can do everything else right and it will still not work.
So I'm checking for my listening on that. So I hold strategy is first there's some kind of a conflict. What's the conflict? Define what the conflict is. What does the resolution look like? Maybe it's like if you wave a magic wand, what's their happily ever after, whatever that is. And then the strategy is getting from the conflict to the resolution. It's all the steps up that ladder to complete it. So I think what I'm hearing is if you don't know the conflict, there's nothing I can help you with. And if you don't know if you know the conflict, but you don't know, like I know a lot of times I bring up conflicts and my idea of a resolution seems like a fantasy. So the strategy, it's hard to be a leader there if people don't believe it's even resolvable in the first place.
Yeah.
Or if you don't know what the conflict is, how do you can't get anywhere anyway. So
yeah, I think, it's interesting that I haven't thought of it this way, but I have this concept I call the 4 fits. And what that means is I have this, part of the strategic questions we ask ourselves or things we want to define is one of them, I always start with product market fit. In other words, is the product fit the market, right? Like if we're building apartments for families, does that fit with the location or the city or, wherever, are there families there to rent? Would be a good example. So I think that would be a conflict, right? The conflict is, does this the vision of this project fit with this market, and it might not, right? There's other fits like capital markets, project fit. The four are, product market fit, capital, product fit, politics, product fit, and then the last one I call team and product fit. In other words, each of those, the product, the capital, the politics, and the team all have to be aligned for that project to be successful. And so maybe that's, like layers of the strategy, right? So even any one of those, like you could get, like let's say you got a great project, you're going to open up a restaurant in, XYZ location, but it happens to be that the city council doesn't want a restaurant there, right? Politically, they don't want it. And so, and sometimes you can overcome that, like you can win that particular battle, but often, and this is one of the, things in the risks in development is you get all the way to the end and you're pressing politically and you lose. Like I've only had it ever happen to me twice in my career out of, probably, I think we've completed 27 projects in our development operations to date. I've only ever had two that didn't get the vote, primarily because we were always assessing early, did we have that fit? And if, lots of times the writing's on the wall, like, you sit with a council person and they're like, no way. Like, and in our business building apartments, we get that reaction a lot, like people that are against housing politically. You in a, presenting a restaurant, like we'll often have a different, scenario for political fit, but that can completely shut you down, right? If you don't win that council vote, you go to city council and they vote no, you're done. Like literally your project is, I don't want to say it no longer exists, but it doesn't have the possibility of winning that political, project fit question or conflict. And then, you're dead.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's, like that's one of our core values as family. It's, treat your employees like family, make sure your guests feel like family, but it's really your community that is your family. I mean, because if you don't have your community support, it's really challenging to be successful.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So let's transition a little bit. You and I have been in a lot of conversations about AI and how it's affecting so many different industries, and it seems to me like you've been doing kind of a deep dive on it for some time. What first got your attention there, and how are you looking to use it in your business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I couldn't pick out a particular moment in time for when AI became like a thing that needs to be paid attention to. I mean, you and I have like, networks of people that were around that are believers in, using technology and computers in our, our businesses and in our personal lives. So I think it fits in that domain generally. But I think in the last, let's say several months, I was a user of like ChatGPT and then Claude AI, like many people. In other words, use it like we used to use Google, right? Search for something, as if it were just a raw search. And then I started to use it, as many people do, you start to have it write, a letter for you or write an email and those kind of things. But one of the things that really, cropped up in the last really like few months is some of these like agent and sub-agent and autonomous agents, or agentic AI as they call it, where it now basically enables these AI, platforms like, Anthropic and OpenAI to then, from a technological standpoint, be able to, be initiated by us to go do some action. And then it can do like several steps or, many, many steps. And, so you might, tell the agent that you create, hey, go out and research these three, like for us, here's how we do it. Let's go out and research the market for apartments in Rialto. Use these websites to search, like pick your data from there, and then write me an assessment of the market, given these parameters, like, we build townhouse rental units. I'd say assume townhouse rental units in a new project, and write me a report and give me an assessment of the market, viability and, sort of demand characteristics. These are the kind of questions that we ask in the development business. And you can let this thing go or launch it, maybe the more right language for that. And then it will go and, do all the search, put the numbers together, create spreadsheets, even create presentation decks if you, prompt it to do so. So this autonomous activity or these autonomous actions really got my attention, even as as recently as like January, February, with a technology called OpenClaw, where basically this is a in essence a piece of technology, piece of software even that you can create and load in your computer, and then through certain connections to memory and connections to the website and certain tools, you can launch it as if it were an employee to go do this work, right? Like find me this data, write this report, give me the report by Friday at 5. I mean, that would
Wow.
be the
Wow.
sort of requests I'd make of an employee, right? Like if I had, had an assistant PM on our team, that would be the sort of thing we would give that person to go do that. And, might have to teach them how to do different things. So this AI tool, OpenClaw in this instance, this agentic AI, can, virtually replace that, low and mid-level employee. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of work to do inside that. I'm oversimplifying vastly just for brevity here, but this is really the future of having agents, replace, for lack of a better way, Mike, to replace human beings. And, there's some ethical thoughts that I have about, that kind of thing. But, our, charge and our fiduciary duty as business owners to ourselves, to our investors, is to, operate profitably and, grow expediently and, create, the ability to, take care of ourselves and our families and, have a good life in the future. That, demand is always there, right? To operate better, operate more efficiently, more profitably, et cetera.
Yeah, you don't have a choice, right? Especially like we were talking, what if you bring in outside investors to your company? And, as my friend who's our CPA as well was saying, you exchange money for control. So if you're giving up control, does that control that you have to give up or compromise with come in and say, by the way, I want to get a return on my investment and you have too many people working here, so we're going to need to figure out some way to use AI to replace them. And that's a real conversation that can happen. And you could say, no, no, we're going to do this anyways. But you might be able to say no. It depends on the arrangement that you have.
Depends on the investor.
Depending on, if it's coming down to how you're going to be competitive in the industry and everyone's using it but you don't have a choice, because you could lose fast now. It's really interesting.
Are you having investors bring that up specifically? Like, is that
no, AI hasn't come up, but I'm noticing as conversations that we're in, there's an analysis about the cost of running the business one way versus another, and I suspect that's going to become an issue. Now, there's also ways that can be used weak, like I'm not weak, but in a weak manner, I'll say. It's like we've had people work before that created documents using AI for training or for specifying a specific, I don't want to say program or project maybe, that didn't necessarily proofread it. You see like what it's saying is based on whatever it learned from that person, not necessarily what fits the culture here.
Yeah, right.
Or I've also had situations where I asked it to assess, we want to build a CPG company and we're trying to do this other thing in media, but we still have the restaurant. And as I'm working through that, it gets to know you. So if I'm uploading specific documents, one of these documents I uploaded was sort of a business assessment of the consumer retail area, like for seasoning and sauces. And that company named it Project Marina. I don't know why. I don't know where they came up with the name. I didn't even notice it. But because I uploaded that, every time I go to reference this kind of circular plan I have for these different parts of the business, what happens is it keeps referencing Project Marina. And I'm like, what the hell is Project Marina?
Yeah,
so
right.
There's still some hand-holding that has to be done and refinement as you're building it. It's not like it's just because it's faster than you doesn't make it smarter than you. I'll put it that way.
Like you and I have had this discussion, amongst ourselves and our colleagues, but, it's like, AI is not going to replace the human being. Right. I mean, it will replace some human beings, but not in the way that people describe. If they're negative about AI, they're like, oh, everybody's going to be laid off like 100%. And, at least as I can tell, and we discuss, amongst each other, that doesn't appear to be reality presently. But what will happen is in a competitive situation, people who are using AI and amplifying themselves as an individual performer or as a business made up of, management individual performers, they're going to accelerate or outcompete people who are not using it. In other words, what is it? Somebody says it's not the AI that will replace you; it's the human being using AI that will replace you, right? From a competitive standpoint, and then we apply that to business, right? Who in your domain of restaurant operators are figuring out how to use AI to lower their costs, increase their profitability? I have the same question. Real estate development, the business generally, Mike, is really technologically backwards. I mean, I would bet money that there's people like well-known, maybe older people in my business that still don't use a computer. Like, I had an old boss who, he never turned his computer on. He'd have emails printed and brought to him. He's probably advanced since then. This is a little going back a ways, but you could say like on a spectrum of people who are users and not users of technology generally, it'll be probably the same sort of spectrum spread in AI. And then I think in AI, I don't think people sit around. I don't know, maybe they did. Maybe when word processing first came out, people were objecting to it. Like, I'm not going to use that, that damn machine. That's, I want my typewriter or whatever people would say, right? But I think that, and you've seen it and we've all seen it, the notable difference is the speed of adaptation and acceptance, and particularly the increase in the power of the technology and AI is so fast. I've never seen it. None of us have ever seen it as quickly as it's advancing. And so, as a personal philosophy, I'm just like, I got to be like doing this in some way. And I'm not trying to say I'm going to go learn and I'm going to be an AI expert. But, like we talked about, like, I think all of us as managers and owners of companies have to be well enough versed in AI to be a bridge between our own businesses, like for me, real estate development, and the AI world. And, maybe I pair up with a, great AI consultant who knows all the technology stuff. I'm sort of getting a little bit of a crash course in that now. Yeah. But I need to be able to watch that person, what they do and the product that they build, meaning the AI tools and the AI agents, to know if that is in fact not only, I don't want to say correct, but effective, right? And is it meet the criteria that we want, right? Maybe that's going to be different for different people, what that looks like. I'll use a different analogy. So in our business and development, we use architects like all the time. It's a fundamental part of our business of designing buildings to build them, to rent them as apartments. And, I always tell people, like, I'm not an architect. I'm very, very comfortable and even proficient, if not fluent, in their language of design. But I always have the strategy and I give that to the architect. I never let the architect give me the strategy. And a lot of people will. They're like, hey, I don't know what I want to do with my project, Mr. Architect. What can I do there? And it's not wrong to ask that question of them. Yeah. But I go, are they the right person to ask? And maybe they have an opinion, but they're not developers. And notably, they have no skin in the game if your project fails. And so what I tell people is I need to know enough about architecture to be effective to manage that architect. And in some ways, particularly in the strategic domain and the execution domains, a lot of times, I need to know better about what the architect needs to do than the architect does. I mean, it sounds weird, and I don't mean drawing, but I mean, hey, getting these plans submitted to the city and the timeline that it takes, and then how does that fulfill our strategy? I need to be, so well educated in that specific domain where, those worlds meet, that I can watch them do it and know if they're doing it right or wrong, or at least, effective or ineffective for our business. And the AI is the same way. An AI consultant would have the exact same, narrative about that.
Great analogy for AI is the same. Like we talked about this morning when I was asking for some thinking around it in a different call that Scott and I had. And I think what you said, if you don't know what the intentions are, what you're trying to produce, basically the resolution to whatever conflict you have, you need to know that before you can decide how AI can help you with it. Otherwise, it just becomes a fun tool that might spin and go nowhere.
It's like
I wanted to ask you. I forgot. Your workforce housing is still a big part of what you do, correct?
Yeah, in fact, it's our primary offer. Probably 90 to 95% of what we do every day is specifically in the apartment, what we call workforce housing domain. So
Yeah.
that's
So we'll
still,
describe it. So workforce housing, the way I hold it was just not your typical apartment with 1 or 2 bedrooms. It's more like for multi-generational families, would you say? Is that fair? Or?
yeah, our product is, so just for, quick reference for your listeners. So we build apartment projects that have rental units. We just happen to design and build a really differentiated kind of apartment unit, which is a townhouse, think like a 3-story building with, the entire unit, 3 stories is one tenant or one family. But in this case, we build a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom apartment unit, which that's the big differentiator. Because like just as you said in your example, most apartments are, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, maybe 3. You might see, and these would be new construction apartment buildings anywhere in the United States, urbanized areas, or I mean, really any apartment building anywhere in the United States. And we call it workforce housing because in building these 5-bedroom units, we're serving a specific demographic in Southern California.
Hmm.
And, our mission focus is to house families that have multiple generations and also happen to be working class and
Yeah.
give them the opportunity to live in a brand new unit and have their family basically live with them in essence.
Yeah,
Multi-generational.
it's genius. I just think it applies so much to the employee base we have of people that have been with it 10, 20, 30 years. Sometimes it's multi-generational employee. They're
Yeah.
multi-generational of them work for us, and others, when you talk to them, they've got 4 or 5, they might have 2 or 3 generations living under one home, but I don't think there's homes that were designed for that the way you're doing
Yeah.
it. So it's
That's
really,
right. Yeah, the development community has done a really poor job of meeting that. I mean, there's different versions that maybe they don't serve families. Like there's family affordable housing, right? In the affordable housing domain, think like subsidized housing. But often most projects will top out at maybe 3 bedrooms.
mm,
Maybe I've seen some with 4. Like what we do with 5 is really off the end of the spectrum. And like people in the development business might argue, well, yeah, there's a reason for that, right? That nobody does 5-bedroom units because there's nobody that needs that. That's one of the classic arguments for why is not everybody else doing that product and it's only you. And I go, true, except I'll go back to my earlier statement, which was the real estate development, real estate business, real estate development business is not exactly a high innovation, business space. It's just not. Like, investors, in the institutional world, like think Wall Street, they all follow each other. And so if one guy's doing it, then they're all doing it. Developers happen to be the similar, right? So, developer will develop and they'll go, oh, what is everybody else doing? And, like it's easy to sell a product to an institutional investor if everybody else is doing it. Oh, Trammell Crow and Holland Partners, they're doing this exact kind of thing. And so that gives comfort to investors that, gosh, if Trammell Crow's doing it and you're doing it too, then, you're smart to follow them. And, I've got like a precedent has been set that somebody big and name worthy, right, name brand has been doing it. And so what that does, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, although it can get you in trouble if you're not watchful in how saturated that space is. Because when
yeah,
everybody's following everybody else, then they follow each other off the cliff too, right?
yeah,
Often
yeah,
from our market perspective. And so,
yeah,
we, and again, from our, sort of common backgrounds, looking for spaces that people are not competing, right? Like call it innovation, call it a niche, call it, contrarian, however you want to describe it. And I just, we at one point in the sort of like 2017 era, we had a bunch of projects that were fit this exact description I just gave you, which is, hey, everybody else is doing this. Not that we were following that, but that was the product to do. Investors like it, the market likes it. There's enough demand to
yeah,
underwrite and know you have a successful project. But then when you sort of take that hat off for a minute and you go, well, what are people not doing? And
yeah,
sort of a little bit of a happy accident, sort of our background, meaning in affordable housing that I've done previously, plus our knowledge of urban markets, just started to suggest this like working class family housing that wasn't for people who are, at a poverty level, which is where affordable housing lives. We're like, a few notches above that, but we're not in the luxury. We're sort of in between those two spaces.
yeah. No, I mean, like I said, it's brilliant. And I was thinking, like, anytime you create an innovation, something new that people don't understand it, it takes a while. Like it's a battle. Like there's always this, like I think we learned it as the crisis of meaning. Like nobody
Mhm.
knows what it means but you. And the crisis is trying to, and the way I always held it is the narratives you have to create as a leader so people can see like related to what they think. And it's hard when you're in a
Yeah,
different, like we have these conversations about restaurants and we bring on restaurant people. We're not really a restaurant. We're an attraction. It's really a fish market that cooks your food for you. And
yeah,
the problem with that is the restaurant people that come in, they're just, I know what I do because I've done restaurants my whole life. I need this much hood space, this much cook, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, right now we have 60 feet of hood space and 1,500 seats. And there's this battle going on between the people running the kitchens, like we need more space, versus the people supplying the kitchen equipment that goes, that's more than enough. Like, where's
yeah.
the breakdown? Is it not understanding what we do and trying to resolve that before you waste money on bringing in another kitchen, which I think is going to
Mhm.
happen anyways, but I don't know yet.
Oh, I got you. Yeah,
The other
yeah,
thing
yeah.
is, like, if you're looking at restaurants, right? You're building restaurants, you're building them for table turns.
Mhm.
Like people come in, they eat, and they leave. If you're driving 6 hours to come visit us, you're not going to leave that fast, especially if it took you 2 hours to get in the building afterwards. And that's what
Right.
happens. So the models we have to design are not typical in the restaurant sense because you can't be successful with our model in that frame of smaller seating. People are going to sit there
Yeah,
a long time, so you got to have more seats. Maybe not more kitchen space. I don't know, but you definitely need more
yeah.
seats. People aren't getting up to leave anytime soon, like a typical restaurant.
So
It's like
what I've done, you're exactly right. Like I for us when we're presenting these 5 bedroom apartment unit projects, I
mhm.
get the reactions very bifurcated. It's either people love it or they hate it. Right? They love it. Like one of my favorites is I'll go into a city, and in California, a lot of the young professionals in the planning departments and the building departments, I think plan checkers and people working behind the counter, are predominantly young professional Hispanic folks. And Mike, when they see this, they're like, "Oh, dude, that's my family." Like I get that. Like immediately, they're like they're locked in. They get it. Their family lives multi generationally. It is their life, and they know it, and they see the housing type and how it can fit. And then the opposite is true often, maybe in the political class, who like I'm just going to be a little blunt here. Usually, probably boomers, maybe Xers, maybe a little bit of millennials, but usually they're not necessarily from that particular culture or even that demographic, maybe in where they work, that kind of thing. And they're like, I don't get it. Like I had a guy from a family office and he's like, yeah, it's like, really? He's like, well, what happens if you get two families that you don't know each other and you move them into the same unit? Like, how do you keep them from fighting? And I was like, oh, okay. I go, I see. Okay. And I was trying to be polite to the guy. I said, look, I'm going to just say this without trying to be like offensive. But I said, the thing is, one, we don't do that. Our families are all related, multi-generational, usually 2 or 3 generations. But I go, the reality is these people are all, I said to this guy, these people are all around you, right? You're the barista at Starbucks, the guy who works at the gas station, the person, the young, office manager. I said, you just don't ever think about where they go home to live, right? I mean, which, it's not unthinkable. I mean, people don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. I said, where they go home is what I told them is they go home to live with their families. If they're, 20 something young professionals,
Yeah,
and often their grandmother lives with them and maybe their aunt or uncle or in-law. And then they've got, adult kids and parents and young kids. And I said, that's the life they go home to, which is absolutely, utterly normal to them. In fact, they would live no other way. I said
yeah,
to the guy, you just don't think about it. And so what I told him is my job in my domain of these 5 bedroom apartment units is like, I have to explain that. And, I want to do it, effectively. And so my point to you, and this is, is about explaining, your differentiation in the restaurant business. I insist, like particularly when we raise capital, like I let the capital guys know, I go, don't have the meeting where you try to pitch the product without me being there. I go, I love you. I love working with you, Joe and
yeah.
Jack. But I said, dude, you got to get me in that room because I just have explained it so many times. I mean, it's, powerful explanations as you and I know together. And, they'll often default to, well, it's like this, or it's like this other thing. And it's like this third thing. They use whatever analogies. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but they try to compare it to something. And that's not wrong. But as you know, and I know together, it's very limited. And the other thing is that if you sit with somebody and that's your first impression of that investor of your product type, then it's really hard to back out of that hole if it's not the right, analogy. And so anyways, for your investors and for people listening, taking control of that, story and how you explain it to people is so important. Like I've just seen it go wrong so many times, and I now insist that it happens.
Trying to put capital together to build a new restaurant, but if you look at if you only look at the last 2 to 3 years of what we went through because we got displaced and had to work out of a parking lot, you missed the 70-year story.
Yeah,
we had 70 years of growth. And the only time it went down is when we got displaced for some reason. So let's look at the bigger picture, but if you plug this into the bank and it goes to an underwriter at a desk somewhere in a corner that's just like you don't fit the criteria next, you don't have the opportunity to tell the story.
I mean, you guys I know you're like working on that now, so I'm sort of sharing that, and you and I and Albert have had these conversations. But my gosh, particularly finance people are terrible, like at sort of understanding visionary moves. Like lenders, particularly, and I'm going to offend some lenders who are listeners. Their job is to assess a thing, and that's it. It works, it doesn't work, and then any sort of visionary, creative innovation around that. That's just they're not built that way, and so it becomes then inherent and incumbent on guys like you and me and our teams to like know that. And so please don't call the banker without me. Because I need to explain it to Mr. Capital Advisor, whoever's raising the capital for you.
So it's a great conversation. Thanks for your time, Scott. Just before we wrap up, where can people find out more about what you do?
Yeah, so they could go two places. Our website is urbanpacific.com, urban like the city, Pacific like the ocean.com. And the other place that people can find me is I'm a heavy user of x.com. There's a killer real estate Twitter, realestatex.com group network of people there. Bunch of developers, investors, operators, family offices, lenders. I mean, any sort of part of the real estate business and real estate development business. They're sort of collected in this on Twitter, or X as it's called now. So it's my handle is just at Scott Choppin on x.com.
All right, cool. Well, everybody go check out Scott's sites if you want to learn more about what he does and more about the industry. And I think this has been great. Appreciate the time and signing off. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.